Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. So, today I have with us Gary Mander. So, Gary and I met on LinkedIn about a year ago. Yeah, we've had a bit of back and forth, a bit of banter, a bit of a knowledge exchange ever since, really. And yeah, I thought this episode is sort of mainly focused on the nuances of sector procurement, which really interesting from my point of view. I come from private sector. I'm private sector through and through, so I've always found the different ins and outs of it quite interesting. So, Gary has predominantly done quite a lot in the public sector in the past. So I thought it'd be a good episode to sort of speak to Gary, get his thoughts on public sector, and maybe compare notes on some of the nuances in private as well. So, Gary, hello.
Luke, hello to you, and thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast.
No worries at all. So, do you want to tell us a bit about your background, if that's okay?
Ooh, yeah. I'll give you a quick 30-seconder. So I'm an electrical engineer. I'm not a kind of a from day one procurement person, but about 20 years ago, I ended up with an opportunity to move into procurement. So I left my engineering background behind me and I went into a kind of a greenfield site. Ended up really enjoying procurement. And the one reason why I like procurement and specifically public procurement is because I feel like I'm invested in it because I'm a taxpayer and I want to make sure that my money that I hand over, my monthly paycheck is spent to the kind of the benefit of everybody, including myself, and it'd be no different for yourself, Luke. Yeah, so I ended up in a number of roles in procurement in the state railway in Ireland, from purchasing into procurement, into category management, into kind of procurement management at the kind of the top end. About 3 years ago, I kind of made a decision. Well, do I want to continue on doing that for the rest of my career, or do I want to pivot and try something else? And I thought maybe consulting would be something that might be kind of a good segue in my career. And I moved from the public sector into the private sector, and I've been there 3 years now, and absolutely love it. Get to work with some great clients, private sector and public sector, and I can bring my 15, 20 years experience into these clients who are having the same problems that we would have been having maybe 10 years ago. So it's a bit of a win-win for everybody, and yeah, best move I ever made.
Oh no, great stuff, great stuff. Now I'm sure I'll have some interesting questions for you, so where you can sort of draw on that experience. So, jumping straight into it, the first question is sort of focused around the regulatory and the compliance side of things. So, first one, how do you think public procurement professionals can navigate the layers, which I imagine there are quite a few of in public sector procurement, and the regulation behind it without slowing down, essential services. So yeah, so like emergency services and stuff like that, and so it doesn't delay those outcomes.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the way I look at it is that you're right. The public sector is a very highly regulated procurement procedure, and no different than the UK and in Ireland and across Europe and across the world. There's legal frameworks that people within those countries have to follow, and those regulations themselves can run to hundreds and hundreds of pages with many different articles and regulations, and it's a very procedural type process that needs to be followed. Clearly, when you're following such a kind of a highly regimented, structured process, it does add time to processes. There are minimum timelines that have to be gone through. Evaluation processes can take forever. Getting your internal governance through your contracting stage, as in getting an approval to proceed, can take a long, long time. So typically, the timelines for let's say, a moderately complex procedure is probably three or four times that the private sector might be able to put that around in. But what I always say to people is that what you get out the far end is a 100% transparent, fully compliant process that will stand up to any scrutiny in a court, if you were to be unfortunate to end up in that place. So to me, it's an investment worth making. The reality, though, is that very few percentage-wise processes end up in court. So that big investment that everybody makes in their day-to-day, thankfully, very little of it will end up in court, and therefore, very few times will you actually get to realise the benefit of what you did. But the process is the process. We don't do ourselves any favors. Maybe we should be able to get through the processes a little bit quicker than we do. I think that's all down to kind of an individual, what happens within the contracting authority themselves. They might have resource issues or whatever the case may be. But the process itself is designed in such a way that it has to be really followed to the letter of the law if you're going to be kind of truly compliant. So you can get through the process if you had, lots of resources and, a very kind of a slick system. Unfortunately, it doesn't really happen everywhere, and I think that's where people get the impression that it's a kind of a very bureaucratic and a slow process.
Right. No, that's a fantastic answer, and yeah, no, it's one it's a question that sort of always dawned on me really about public sector and how you get things over the line. I like what you said earlier as well, by the way, about knowing where your paycheck's going, and I have spoke to a couple of public procurement professionals before, and that's exactly what they've said as well about it's having that impact on the community. So, but yeah, from a regulatory standpoint, now that's fantastic. And sort of tying into what I said about value for money, this sort of question sort of focuses on value for money versus compliance. So, what challenges do you think public procurement faces in balancing value for money with, stricter, what you could argue are stricter or different compliance regulations that are in public versus private, especially when it's under, public scrutiny?
Yeah, there's probably a few ways of looking at this, Luke. So if I kind of maybe rephrase the question this way, that if I'm asked or challenged to run a procurement process, okay, and the very worst outcome for me would be that contract award ending up in court and my contracting authority, my name, in the media, that's the last place I want to be. So I'm going to be quite kind of risk averse when I'm doing my procurement, and I'm not going to bend rules even though it's the right thing to do. So really what happens is that you in public procurement have to set the rules of the process up front. You have to tell everybody who's going to take part up front. Now, if you get halfway into your process and you realize that you haven't designed that in the optimal way, what are your options? Do you just continue on and the winner is the winner, even if it's not the right winner, or do you stop and start again? Very, very, very often it's the former, and you bash on and you hope you get a good result at the far end. And that's, I don't think, in anybody's kind of interest. So public procurement is difficult in that regard, but I mean, I bang this drum a lot that before you start a process, you should have a good idea in your mind who's going to win. And that might sound counterintuitive and a little bit boxing off the market, but no, not really. You should have a good understanding of who the key players are within the market. You should have a ballpark figure as to what sort of charges that they would bring. And if you've gone through your tender process and at the far end somebody wins who you hadn't encountered, maybe it's a case that your award criteria was wrong, or maybe that your market sounding exercise wasn't kind of thorough enough. So it is in your hands to get good value for money outcomes consistently, but does it happen all the time? No, and I think that's probably again an area where kind of public procurement lets itself down.
No, that's a really good answer, and I know you said, it sounds counterintuitive, like having an idea of who might or could win, but I think there's a lot of similarities there between public and private. Like, I'd suppose, you could argue in private sector as well, in category management, your job as a category manager, and same as public sector, is to know the market and to know the players in the market. So yes, you could say it's counterintuitive, but at the same time, you perform on both sides, public and private. You're performing your due diligence. Get that one out, and sort of validating your prior market research, really. So no, and like you said, if it comes out that it's somebody else or you didn't expect who's competitive and wins, then so be it. It just shows that you've done your job. So that's a really good answer. Thank you. So this next question focuses on, because there's a lot of talk, I think, generally around innovation, and a lot of people focus on transformation and tech, which is great, but I suppose it's reshaping that question into a more traditional space in public sector. So how do you think innovation can be encouraged in public sector, given some of the rigidity and the compliance requirements around it, and what you could argue, we're looking from the outside in as a risk averse culture.
So in Ireland currently, we're still under the European directives. The UK forced its own path last February. So in our, which would have been in the UK setting as well up to February, there was a procurement process called the Innovation Partnership. And what the Innovation Partnership did, and like the clue is in the name, is that it was how you procure innovation. So if you go out to the market looking for something innovative, really the risk is all on the potential supplier, isn't it? That you're asking them to come up with something. What if it doesn't work? What if it falls flat? Blah, blah, blah. So the innovation partnership procedure was specifically there designed to be able to nurture and encourage a contract award and have kind of sharing of risk and all of this kind of good stuff. But at the very beginning, there would need to be an advertisement that said we're looking for innovation in the following space, whatever it kind of might be. Now, in the UK, the innovation partnership process is gone, and you now have a competitive flexible procedure, which basically means you design it yourself. You actually now determine how the process is operated. So you would have to structure what innovation you were looking for, how you're going to nurture that innovation, what a contract award would look like if there was going to be a pilot scheme, what happens to the IPR at the end of it, all of this kind of good stuff. That would now be formed and drafted into the design of your procedure. And we have seen some procedures that have developed innovation, not a lot, if I'm honest, but I don't think that's procurement's fault. I just think that's the businesses not coming forward with looking for innovative requirements. And I can give you one example from Ireland from 2 years ago. We had a problem of the kind of the life buoys at canals and lakes missing, people robbing them, stealing them, whatever, and therefore when you needed one, it wasn't there. And Dublin City Council looked for a innovative solution from the market to stop this happening, but they weren't they weren't very close on what the solution would look like, as in they didn't say whether they should be behind broken glass, they didn't say whether they would have somebody go out inspecting them, but the ultimate innovative solution was an automatic warning device when one of these buoys was taken out of its enclosure, and that would alert Dublin City Council that asset number 537 is missing from it, and that's how it. But remember, that product didn't exist up to that point, and if you're a supplier who came up with that, you'd be saying to yourself, well, what if I was to develop this and then nobody else ever bought it, and it was only for Dublin City Council? How would I even price that? How would I manage that risk? So only via the innovation partnership procedure did that happen. So it's an example of where innovation can come from. But innovation comes from the market, provided the opportunity to be innovative comes from the public sector. So really it's up to the public sector to say, here's the challenge that we have. I want you to come up with a solution that will be able to solve my problems for me. And I think we just don't see enough of it at the moment.
That's a really good example, actually, because I think I think a lot of the time when we're looking for innovation, ironically, we're looking for something that already exists. When in fact the whole point behind innovation is new and exciting, and practical ideas. And like you said there, it didn't exist prior to that particular circumstance. So no, that's a really really good way of looking at it.
If you think about it this way,
Thinking
Luke,
about
I mean, what the EU, and this will be the same for the US and the same for the UK, they're looking for new markets to evolve from within its territories. So if the EU can design a flexible procurement process that would encourage people to be innovative and come up with really innovative solutions, that could potentially be a game changer for a whole sector within the EU. It could even bring out a completely new sector. So I think the impetus is there at all of the kind of contractual authority levels, the EU and the UK and the USA. It's just really getting people to the table now to actually deliver on it. And I know for a fact that procuring something innovative is a little bit less tangible than what we might be used to, and maybe it needs a bit of a step change in the way we educate our public procurement buyers to be able to say, look, this isn't a risky process. This is potentially a win-win for everybody, and maybe this is something that we should do more of.
No, 100%. No, That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Thank you. Um, and yeah, I suppose this one I'm really interested in because, as I said before, my public sector experience is nil. So it'd be good to get someone uh, from that area's sort of opinion on this. And this is more around supplier relationships. So what? And again, this is probably a bias from a private sector person. What I would perceive as a process-driven environment. How, in your opinion, do you think you can build strong supplier partnerships while maintaining, the accountability, transparency, and fairness that comes with those partnerships?
Yeah, it's a balancing act. I have to say, it's not something that is very straightforward. I never had a problem with it, and I'll maybe just explain a little bit why. But typically, the duration of a contract is finite within public procurement. So if I'm going to need widgets, I will go out and I'll procure a 3-year contract for widgets, and I might have an extension option of a further 2 years, maybe something like that. So I'm time bound for 5 years for my widgets. Okay, now at the end of that 5 years, what happens is basically I shake your hand, Luke, and I say thanks for the last 5 years. We go again, and if Luke doesn't win the next contract, it could be somebody else, and now I have to have my next 5-year relationship with that other entity. When I did my master's degree in strategic procurement, we were all told about the kind of deep supplier relations and how buyers and suppliers need to work together to be able to extract the maximum value they can out of their contracts. I'm a big believer in that, but the dilemma is how do I do it when the contract is time bound? And how do I do that at a time when you're not really going to invest that much in me, knowing that in 5 years' time or even 3 years' time, I could turn my back and walk away? And it is a challenge. So what do I do? So I did this all the time. I was at the point of onboarding suppliers. I said, look, we have really high expectations of you. We want to work with you as a partner, but will come a time at the end of the contract where we will have to re-tender, and there will be no favoritism. There'll be no additional scores that I can give you because of great delivery up to this point. And it's a difficult conversation, and it certainly gets more difficult the closer you get to the end of the contract, because on day one you say, well, look, at 5 years is a long way away. When it gets to a year, suppliers start saying, okay, well, look, maybe I'm not going to be going above and beyond and reinvesting in my time. But I've spoken to lots of suppliers, and the thing that they would continuously say to me was that we want you to have the best experience with us as you can possibly have. We know for a fact that it might not get us any additional scores as part of your tender. We don't mind that. But what we do hope is that we demonstrate to you what is possible, and therefore you will factor those items into the next tender process that says we will be looking for this, we will be looking for that, we'll be looking for this. To the point that suppliers who maybe wouldn't be the type of people who would like to be flexible with you in that regard wouldn't take part in the tender process. But be under no illusion, you would never want to be seen to be structuring your tender process around a particular supplier. I mean, that's not really what it's about. But let's say, for argument's sake, there was to be a research and development type angle to things where you wanted certain products that were off the shelf tailored or modified to your specific needs, and that whole process might take 4, 5, 8 years to actually do in reality. Well, then obviously a 3 or 5 year contract for you is not going to work. So it's about you understanding with your conversations with the market before you participate. This is what I'm looking for. How am I going to do it? And if the feedback came back to you and said, well, look, you're looking at maybe a 5 or 8 year timeline for that, well, then your contract will be for 5 or 8 years. That's what you do. You wouldn't time bound yourselves. But it is a challenge, Luke, and be under no illusion at all. I think people talk about the incumbent advantage, and it is a real advantage, but as I often say to people, the advantage, and this has been proven in courts, that there's nothing anybody can do about that. That's not the supplier's fault that they have a bit of an incumbent advantage. They've been working with you for the last 3 years. They understand your business operations. It's up to the procurement process, though, to make sure that those insights can't be leveraged to score higher marks within the process. So yeah, it is a challenge, but it's not something that is impossible to kind of navigate.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I really that's one thing that I have gathered from conversations with people like yourself and other public procurement people, is that impartiality, like you were saying about when it comes to renewal and stuff like that, it's looked at from for almost a clean slate. And I personally, that's what I try to do in private. However, I think that doesn't always happen, because there's no strict structure around it. And I don't necessarily, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think what I would say though is, if if you are in private and you are doing that, are you really getting the best value, or are you just doing it for going through the motions and the same old rigmarole, really?
Yeah, but as I see that, if I'm a supplier and my prices are X, we'll say, and I can stand over those costs, and I know that built into those costs is a certain percentage which covers all the additional value that I give to my customers. If a tender comes out again and all of those extra asks aren't contained within it, well, I know now that if I put forward my prices, my standard prices, I'll be undercut by people who aren't going to offering the stuff that I can. And really, I would like to think that at some stage, I would put my hand up and say, listen, guys, there's a problem with this process. For the last 5 years, I've been doing this. That hasn't been covered off in your tender anywhere, so therefore you're giving misleading information out to the marketplace. And again, that doesn't happen that often either. I kind of rarely see it, and I look at a lot of tenders and a lot of clarification questions that come coming back and forth. But maybe it's something that people should be doing more often.
Yeah, no, very good point. Very good point. Just before we wrap up, I'm gonna hit you with a question that I've thought of. It wasn't a planned one. This one.
Oh, okay. These
Oh,
are good
so
ones.
a Brucey bonus. So from your knowledge of private sector procurement, what do you think is one thing private could learn from public procurement, in your opinion? Could be anything.
There's actually quite a few. I see a lot of stuff written online about the kind of the lack of transparency in private sector procurement, and that even ghosting suppliers who've maybe put 5 months into pulling an
Yeah,
RFP together and then walking away from it. And that, to me, not only does it look bad for the actual company that's doing it, I think it lets the whole profession down, um,
yeah,
on a wider basis. That procurement does have a kind of a sticky type, um, it has a sticky kind of image, I would say, and I think that's primarily because you're going to get more losing suppliers in procurement than you get winning suppliers. So
yeah.
therefore, you'll rarely hear the winners complain about the transparency of the process. So therefore, maybe it's amplified a little bit bigger. So what we take for granted in the public sector, as in setting a reward criteria up front, scoring the tenders transparently, providing robust feedback. These are all mandatory things, by the way. These aren't a luxury. These are mandatory. Feedback on the characteristics and relative advantages on one tender versus the unsuccessful tender. You don't have to go to that level, but I think having some sort of a more transparent RFT or RFP process, I think, would help your process. It would actually make your company look better in the eyes of the market. But I think on a wider basis, on a macro level, it will improve the perceptions of procurement more generally. So I suppose that would be maybe the biggest one for me.
That is a really really good one. And me personally, that's something that I try to do purely because it's fair and it's impartial. And like you say, ghosting suppliers, at the end of the day, yeah, people are busy, but there's no need to ghost people. People have put their man hours and effort and hard work into that. It's out of, if anything, respect. So no, completely agree with you. It's a really good one, that one. Yeah, that was all my questions for you today. It's been really good. Yeah, I especially like your the conversation about innovation and the life boys. So that's a really good one.
Good.
But
I'm glad.
but, you know,
I love any opportunity I get to talk about public procurement is good, because I think we also have an image problem, but I don't think that's a universal thing. I just think there's little pockets that give the rest of it a kind of a bad name. I enjoy it. I think it's a fantastic process. Can it be improved? 100%. And that's what we're here to do, is to kind of continuously innovate our processes and make them more attractive to the market. I mean, that's what we're here to do.
no, 100%, and you're doing just that. No, you're a You're a good role model for other public procurement professionals now. So thank you, Gary. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Luke.
And yeah, I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.